1262nd day of the war. At the coming meeting, Putin and Trump have more questions than response. The Russian president either has to or does not have to meet with Zelensky to make this meeting happen, but it is already clear that Trump's measures are working. Indian oil companies have stopped buying Russian oil despite the rhetoric of New Delhi. Will new restrictions be introduced? We will find out today. The details of Ukrainian strikes became known on the night of August 7. Drones hit the most important unit of the Afipsky Oil Refinery and the railway sector, responsible for repairing and servicing tracks, that is, critically for Russia in the conditions of strikes on the infrastructure. Russia itself is trying to hit the Ukrainian railway and also continues to fight with the bridge in Kherson. The count of the bridge against the UMPC is still 6-0. On the front, Russian military complains that Ukrainian drones left them without logistics on the front line. To at least level the chances, Russian drone operators master the trophy Ukrainian heavy drones, known in Russian armed forces as Yagas, because its own production of such heavy drones is not in the pocket. Not in the pocket are the most basic things. Volunteers in Buryatia ask local residents for motorcycles for the needs of the front and coolers for the hospitals. The state does not care about the needs of the military, as the fate of these very military after the front. Russian soldiers refused to bury on the Alley of Slavia, since he died not at the front and not in the hospital, but in his dacha. Well, another Russian soldier recorded a pre-death video in which he said goodbye to everyone and said that the case of Puzik lives and his attempt to fight against the produced drug trafficking, fortunately, ended with the fact that he was sent to the assault in one end. About this and much more in today's fresh report, which you can support with your like, comments, and subscriptions to the channel. All these actions help promote the video, especially your subscriptions. They are important for YouTube algorithms. Well, you can support the channel financially on Patreon, the link to which is in the description, and by buying NVPN. This is a tool to bypass blockages that allow you to bypass blockages. Use YouTube at normal speed, Twitter, Instagram, go to blocked resources. Roskomnadzor is actively fighting against VPNs, but we have not yet managed to fight it. According to Russian legislation, the purchase of VPNs and their use is still legal, so buy NVPN by the link in the description. Thereby not only will you get access to a normal version of the internet, but also support the release of new videos. Well, we are moving to what happened in the last 24 hours. Trump will meet with Putin only if he meet with Zelensky, wrote the New York Post with a link to the unnamed representative of the White House. Putin should meet with Zelensky so that the meeting with Trump takes place. The place is not yet determined. Earlier, Putin called the meeting with the president of Ukraine possible, but emphasized that a certain condition should be created for this. However, soon the US president himself will check this information. Trump said that Putin does not need to meet with Zelensky until the meeting with him. No, they would like to see me and I will do everything in my power to stop the killings, said the US president at the ceremony in the White House, responding to the question of this. Although, again, is this a refutation? In the sense that for some reason the story with the meeting of the three of us turned into a separate meeting of Putin and Zelensky, and this did not be declared anywhere. In short, some kind of damaged telephone on the entire coil. Trump confirmed that before his meeting with Putin, the meeting of Putin and Zelensky should have taken place. That is, the journalist's question was formed in this way, but it was not announced anywhere, it was not declared anywhere, so I do not understand until the end what the conversation is about. Trump also noted that his ultimatum to Vladimir Putin to stop the fire remains in force. It depends on him, he answered the corresponding question. Let's see what he says. I'm very frustrated, Trump said in response to the question of whether he will extend the term of the ultimatum after August 8. You can guess what Trump means. For example, it is possible now to introduce new sanctions for the meeting with Putin. You cannot give Trump words of support, and moreover, in the same speech he literally said in several seconds, called two different numbers of general losses of Russia and Ukraine, first 40,000 months, then 20,000 months. It is better to wait until the end of today. If the measures against Russia and its trade partners have not been put down, then it is almost time to introduce them. In the meantime, a certain plan appeared in the Polish publication Want, which was allegedly suggested by the United States. I will not retell, but such moments are mentioned there, such as the freeze-up of the conflict along the current front line for 49 years and the absence of guarantees for the entry of Ukraine into NATO. I do not see any point in discussing it seriously because the aid officer of Zelensky tested it. It is doubtful that Witkoff or Ushakov managed to talk to this portal. Yesterday, during the conversation, the leaders did not sound anything like this, wrote Dmitry Litvin on Twitter. Yes, from where the plan could take place at the Polish publication, it is decidedly not clear, moreover, as the publication notes, or on the contact line with the European leaders and Zelensky. According to the results of the negotiations in the Kremlin, the leaders of Poland are not present. But let's wait for at least more serious insides. You hear for sure as I for the first time about this publication. I have already told you that I do not believe in insides from random media when it is not another, the largest buildings in the world with a huge network of sources, including in the American government. If it were some kind of Axios or Washington Post, you could still think, but here is some clear beep, to be honest. At least that's how it looks for me right here and now. In the meantime, the peace signed by Trump against India continues to work, despite the rhetoric of the authorities. After the additional tariffs imposed by the President of the United States against India by 25%, the total tariffs against New Delhi now include 50%. The Indian state oil companies have stopped buying Russian oil. Bloomberg writes about this. Agency spokesman clarified that this is about companies like Indian Oil Corp, Bharat Petroleum Corp, and Hindustan Petroleum Corp. Meanwhile, officially, New Delhi has not given any orders from the oil companies to stop buying raw materials from Russia, and the government, Narendra Modi, resists Trump's tariffs, at least in words. Well, whatever they say, let them do whatever they want, but if India really does not buy Russian oil or greatly reduces these purchases, this will already be a very good story that will allow an even greater blow to the Russian budget, which, to be honest, I don't know if you paid attention or not. Yesterday, the data on the Russian budget deficit came out. It just jumps at an incredible pace. There are already almost 4.9% invested for the entire year, 3.9% in FNB at 3.6%. Well, that is, no one understands where they will take the money from. They do not have money. They cannot take it on the foreign market. They have a problem with loans on the internal market, because these loans for the state will be more expensive than the profit from these loans. In short, from an economic point of view, again, in such a bad situation, Russia has not yet been. Well, that is, there was no worse situation, but we will discuss in detail with Vladimir Milov. He will give specific numbers and specific, in fact, he will write down what threats there are right here and now for the Russian budget and what they can lead to. Another interesting U.S. news, as if from the last century. The American military gave Russia data on Abrams tanks, reports the FBR. In the United States, the serviceman Taylor Adam Lee from Texas was arrested, who supposedly gave Russia secret information about M1A2 Abrams tanks. According to this investigation, Lee provided information about the vulnerabilities of the American tank, the person who it was considered by the officers of Russian intelligence. In exchange for this data, the American serviceman allegedly expected to receive Russian citizenship. According to the court document, the current U.S. military officer serving in Fort Bliss, Texas, has access to their complete secret information. There were enough such useful idiots in the times of the first Cold War, or I don't know if it is appropriate to call it the first one now, let it be just a Cold War. Read on the paper how the USSR generally appeared like a nuclear bomb. Now the useful idiots have appeared again, and this time to the left and to the right. I hope we will find out soon whether Taylor Lee considered Russia a victim of traditional values or a bastion of the fight against American imperialism. The main thing is that the civilization of Budov's apartments, it seems, is no longer light. The United States will receive control over the strategic corridor in the south of the Caucasus as part of the peace agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan, reports Reiter. The corridor will be called Trump's Route in the name of the international world and about the flowers, and will be known by the abbreviation TRIP. This was reported by a link to the American officials. According to the agency, the ceremony for the signing of the frame agreement is already today, August 8, in the White House, where Trump will negotiate with the Prime Minister of Armenia, Nikol Pashinyan, and the President of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev. In principle, Trump has already announced this in his social network. In accordance with the agreed position of the future agreement, Armenia, for a long time, will provide the United States with only rights to the development of the transit route, which will connect the main part of Azerbaijan with the encirclement of Azerbaijan by the former head of the Allied border around Turkey. In addition, it is expected that Armenia-Azerbaijani leaders will sign documents with a request to disband the Minsk Group, created in '92, for intermediary in the conflict led by the United States, France, and Russia. I tell you about this because, first of all, I think you are interested in how Armenia managed to negotiate with Azerbaijan, and secondly, in my opinion, it is extremely symptomatic that they agreed at all without any part of Russia. This is a new reality, unthinkable for 5 years ago, in which Putin drove Russia and his war in Ukraine, lost the last remnants of influence even in the so-called close foreign, and lost the status not only of superpower, but even of the regional hegemon. I told you about this in the video about the consequences of the war and the fixation of Putin on Ukraine, and now the symptoms described in it only increase and confirm my words. In the meantime, Trump either gives Putin time or does not give it. In the occupied territories, they have put a flow of raising Ukrainian children. In the LPR, they have created a catalog of children and children's groups where they have published their names, photos, and characteristics. The Ministry of Education and Science of the occupied LPR has created a regional data bank for children needed in the family. You can get acquainted with them on the website of the ministry. Quote from there, "We hope that you will find your child here and give him a bright future," the ministry said in its social networks. To this, the head of the Save Ukraine, Nikolai Kulibo, paid attention. The publication of the channel in the department is attached to a link, which is leading to the page with a bank of data of 294 children. There are specified names, photos with blurred faces, age, group of health, and description of characters. This is how some of them look, for example. Good conscience and responsibility as for culture and mass events, has acting talent, sings well and dances well, can expressly read poems and prose. An unaggressive, good-natured person who is able to sympathize with the performance of orders is welcome. If he takes it as a matter of fact, he is brought to the end, shows the initiative to create peace in the class cabinet, and is very responsible for cleaning up the class. At the same time, it is possible to filter children by beep, color of the eye and hair on the website. What describes our Ukrainian children is not different from the slave catalog. This is real children's trafficking in the 21st century, which the world needs to stop immediately. The majority of children in this catalog came to the occupation of the Lugansk region and had Ukrainian citizenship. Some parents killed the occupation authorities and others just made Russian documents to legalize theft. When the Russians on the negotiations require lists of captured children, it is enough for them to just hand over the base from the Lugansk Ministry of Education. The entire proof base of their crimes is right on their official resources, Kulibo wrote. The favorite newspaper from Trump's newspaper, New York Post, has already released a note about this, called it actually trade of children, child traffic, what it is in fact, as well as the signs of the genocide which are officially established, and in fact, for which Vladimir Putin is announced in the roses. This is an absolutely monstrous act from the side of the Russian authorities, which not only occupies territory, but also effectively intercepts children there and indoctrines them, depriving them of their language, their culture, their tradition. This is all forbidden by the international law, no matter how you treat it. Well, and of course, killing their parents and depriving the children of their families. This is an absolutely monstrous manifestation, if you want, from Nazism. If you want genocide, call it however you want. It seems to me at all that the term here is the last one. This is just a monstrous crime against humanity, and everyone who is involved in this should be punished in one way or another, by self-proclaimed or by a fair court. Well, so that this does not happen, so that Russia does not have the opportunity to capture Ukrainian children even more, to kill Ukrainian citizens and to capture Ukraine. In fact, every day Ukrainian fighters resist Russian aggression, give their lives for their family and loved ones. To continue to just exist, Russia kills Ukrainians with missiles, bombs, drones, and just shoots at civilians, as I told you yesterday, and Ukraine can resist this only with the help of its own soldiers. Well, we can help this military. In fact, we continue to collect cars and expenditures for the fifth assault. I think today we will close it with you. I hope at least for this. Most of it is collected. There are about 152,000 left. Thank you very much to everyone who has already taken part in this meeting, but to those who are only going to, I remind you of the appeal from the war. We call on the subscriptions to the Michael Nacke channel. Support 5 separate assault. Kiev Brigade, your help is not just money. This is a chance to save lives, support us in the most difficult moments, and bring our victory close. Together we can do more. Make your contribution to the victory over the enemy. Glory to Ukraine. Glory, glory. Here's the Monobank QR code in the description, the link to Monobank, to PayPal, to cryptocurrency, USDT, RC20, Bitcoin, Ethereum, that is, as convenient for you. All this is available, all this is normal, and the only possible choice now is to support Ukrainian military, and this is a way to do this. In general, all links are in the description, but we continue. The Prosecutor General of Ukraine accused the leadership of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine's torturing Ukrainians. The Prosecutor General's Office of Ukraine reported that a repressive treatment system could be organized in the Prosecutor General's Office of Ukraine. A journalist named Victoria Roskina was one who was tortured in this facility, according to the ministry's report. According to the Prosecutor General's Office of Ukraine and CHP2 in Taganrog, a journalist was tortured systematically, in battles, humiliations, threats, and harsh restrictions on access to medical care, drinking water, and food. In addition, physical punishments and psychological pressure were used against her, demanding cooperation with the ministry's administration, according to the ministry's statement. According to the version of the Ukrainian Prosecutor General, the responsible for such a treatment of a journalist, as well as other Ukrainians who were under the protection, is the ex-head of the SISO2. The figure is clear about the suspicion of Part 2, Article 28, and Part 1, Article 438 of the Criminal Code of Ukraine of a cruel treatment of the civil population, carried out on premeditated basis by a group of people, the statement says. Victoria Roshchina, working with Gramatsk and Ukrainian Truth, and disappeared on August 23, May 24. The Russian authorities recognized that she was detained and is in Russia. In October last year, it became known that she died during the tapering in Moscow from the prison in Taganrog. After the body of Roshchina was returned to Ukraine, an expertise was carried out, during which which Ukrainian specialists found multiple marks of torture and cruel treatment on the body. In addition, a literal bone was broken off the journalist and some internal departments were absent, according to Ukrainian media with a link to the source. Some details of Ukrainian strikes on Russian objects appeared on the night of August 7. As a result of an attack on the railway infrastructure, an object of the Chersk distance puts was hit and the project Cyberborshina was installed. Supposedly, a technical base is damaged, where road equipment is kept and serviced, as well as areas that are used for coordination of repair works in the direction of Lech-Salsk-Stormenskoye. The Chersk distance responds to the technical content of the path, including planned repair, emergency response, service of airfield transports, and seasonal training. Disrupting its operations complicates the operational output of the areas after squads, explosions, and crawls. Also, in Cyberborshina, we learned the details of the attack on the oil refinery in Krasnodarsk Krai. As a result of the strike on the Afipsky refinery, the SBGK unit was hit. The analysts made a conclusion. The critical damage, apparently, was the core part of the unit. This unit works with gas condensate and adjacent oil gas, which is delivered to the processing plant. In the process, propagandutana fractions are allocated, a stable light gasoline, and the remnants are purged to a state appropriate for further use as fuel or raw material for other processes. The thing shown in image 2, the red one, is one of the key parts of this system. It is here that the mixture is heated to a temperature of 253 degrees Celsius, dependent on the needed regime, to provide the appropriate conditions for further fractionation. It works under high pressure and temperature, which makes it critically important, but also a potentially dangerous part of the entire unit, said in Cyberborshina, once again confirming that in Ukraine they definitely know where to hit in order to cause Russian oil and other objects maximum damage. Colleagues from Inform Napalm noted that the Russian part, the location of which came to the Ukrainian UD, on August 7, earlier appeared in one of their investigations on the secret war that Russia carried out in Donbas. This is what the investigators wrote about it. Journalist investor RFE Mark Rudov published an interesting thread in which he paid attention to the attack of Ukrainian drones on the point of constant dislocation of the 7.6 Remote Reconstruction Battalion of the Russian Armed Forces in Slavyansk, Kuban. Militia 23,286 is part of the 99th Brigade of Maternal and Technical Service. This journalist has been monitoring Sint reports related to Russia's military invasion of Ukraine since 2014. In the context of this strike, he also reminded us of one of the important investigations by Inform Napalm. Tankers for war in Donbas were delivered by soldiers of the 7.6 Russian armed forces. This Sint report was published in 2019. It said that in the social network profile of V-Contact-T, the senior mechanic of the driver of the 7.6 Russian armed forces, next to him was Vasilis Dilik, and photos and video proofs of the secret supply of Russian tanks to Donbas were found. Later, Russian propaganda tried to legalize these supplies, providing them for trophy from the chosen F***CKS, as one of the soldiers said in an interview. A quite interesting investigation for those who did not monitor the course of the Russian-Ukrainian war until 2022. It is curious to see how military objects and parts of the aggressor country, which we wrote for the last 11 years, now become goals for Ukrainian strike drones. Let us remind you that until the full-scale invasion in the 1421st year, we led the database of Russian aggression, in which all Russian military units, soldiers and equipment noticed in the aggression against Ukraine in Donbas and in Crimea. After the 22nd year, we also began to lead a new database, Russian Invasion, in which the units involved in the full-scale invasion are recorded. Of course, these bases are not exhausting, but the Russian aggression base was definitely the largest in the world, and many OSINT researchers relying on it. The materials from it were also based on a proof base, which Ukraine provided in the European Court. Human rights Inform Napalm. Osinters learned the consequences of the Ukrainian attack on the Saki airfield in occupied Crimea, trying to check the statement of the SBU about the strike there immediately 5 planes, and came to the conclusion that the strikes really took place. This is what the author of the channel Dnipro Osin Gorbaz saw in the pictures in a low resolution. Judging by the satellite images, I can confirm the damage to the Su-30SM station, where the grass burned a little, as well as the fact of detonation in the warehouse of aviation weapons. Overall, due to the bad quality of the image, it is possible to only assume 6 more places of damage, 3 of which are likely to be damaged by aviation hangars. So you should wait for a picture with a higher resolution. According to me, he writes, based on these data, yes, some sides were really damaged, and most likely one of them was really destroyed, as the SBU states, makes the conclusion of the researcher. Well, let's hope that more high-quality images will appear, and together with them, the reason is even more to trust the statements of the SBU, which have not yet been brought up. Cyberborshina learned the satellite image after the raid of Ukrainian drones on the night of August 2 on the airfield Primorsk-Aktor, one of the launch points of Shaheds on the cities of Ukraine. 2 buildings for the storage of UAVs, like the Shaheds, were hit and destroyed. High activity of UAVs themselves around the structures was observed in these areas. The critical system of storage and training of air defense means of destruction was also damaged. In addition, in various parts of the airfield territory, the burns have been recorded, and an unusual activity in the area of one of the launch sites for UAVs, Ukrainian centers note. The Ukrzaliznytsia reports that Russia carried out a strike on railway infrastructure in Dnipropetrovsk region on night of Thursday. According to the head of the company's management, Evgenia Pertsevskaya, a frontline railway was attacked. For a while, the movement of trains through the Chablin station, which is 25 kilometers from the front line, was stopped. The Russian Ministry of Defense, in turn, stated about the strike of a railway junction in the Dnipropetrovsk region. The Russian troops, according to Ukraine, will seriously take care of the strikes on railway logistics. Then Ukraine's partners should seriously take care not only of the supplies of additional air defense resources, but also of the equipment to support the work of the railway network, the functioning of which is extremely important for Ukraine, as it is important for Russia. However, Russia has already tried to neutralize the Ukrainian railway before, but nothing came out of it. Russian forces continue to strike the bridge that connects the Kherson district of Karabul with Big Ground, and the bridge continues to stand. The war blogger Fighter Bomber, close to the Russian armed forces, said earlier that this is the answer to the question why the Russian army has not yet taken all the bridges through Dnipropetrovsk. Here's what he writes now. In the meantime, the count in the game of Kherson Bridge against the Ministry of Defense has reached 6-0, 6 direct strikes to the bridge. The bridge stands and is operating. At the same time, everything around the bridge is destroying because Ukrainians are slowly coming together to the exit from the island and sitting on bags closer to the exit. They are hit, that is, mostly civilized people who are waiting for evacuation, admits, apparently, Fighter Bomber. The bridge to the most part to the majority is personally interesting to me, clean and sport interested, adds the author of the channel. The interesting thing here is simple. Can all our military vehicles, having the entire spectrum of weapons of the 21st century, break one spotty bridge, which is located in the range of destruction of all types of heavy weapons? Rifle, MPT, artillery, drones, heavy mortars, diversons, Beks, combat dolphins, robots, Fedorov, and so on. The length of the bridge is 250 meters, the wide is 15. It is clear that our military experts destroyed it a week ago, but it is good that I am not a military expert. And personally, I would like to see the current and rejoice that we are really power, writes Fighter Border. Apparently, the only reliable way to destroy the bridge is to break the charge buried under it earlier. It is even better if the charge was laid by the bridge operators themselves to break it when the enemy is close. The Russians applied this tactic first, and now it has been adopted by the Ukrainian Defense Forces. The Ukrainian strike drone broke a concrete bridge in the Belgorod region of Russia, which was actively used by the Russian army for logistics. Its operation was shown in the 3rd Separately Heavy Mechanized Brigade, known as the Irish Brigade. According to the military, the operation was carried out by a company of strike UAVs and aviation systems of the 112th Separate Brigade of Territorial Defense, which is now given to the Railway Brigade. The bridge was a long time an important link in the deployment of equipment and the personnel of the armed forces of the Russian armed forces by the border area. Russian military forces, afraid of the breakthrough of Ukrainian units, demined the bridge with anti-tank mines of the TM-62. The mine was managed to be discovered by Ukrainian scouts. Ukrainian armed forces quickly launched strike FPV drones to the bridge with a ferocious combat unit. The drone became in fact a detonator for trapped mines. As a result of a powerful explosion, the bridge was destroyed. According to the Sint Analytic Blinsk, the destroyed bridge was near the village of Novopetrovka on the territory of the Belgorod region of the Russian Federation. Thus, the Ukrainian forces not only eliminated the important transport artillery of the enemy, but also suffered additional losses due to the use of engineering ammunition itself. The secret of success is that charges for breaking posts are usually put on supports, and to destroy the support of the bridge with air, bombs, or missiles is, to put it mildly, not trivial, and it is definitely more difficult than flying a drone under the bridge. So we wish the Ukrainian drone operators further success against Russian logistics. The details of the case of work of the Russian Air Defense Unit in Kulishevka, Rostov region, appeared on the days before. Let me remind you then the Russian missile ZRK S-300 decided to return to its native haven and did things there. Now the Ukrainian channel Aksinova brings satellite images from which it makes conclusion that a small warehouse, probably with missiles, was destroyed at the base. It remains only to congratulate the Russian anti-aircraft missiles with a successful and high-precision strike. It would always be so. Deep state reports about the Russian advance in the area of the successful war on Nikolaevka on the west flank of the Pokrovsk direction, and in the area of Fedorovka on the east. Ukrainian military correspondent Konstantin Mashevitz believes that the Russian command is deployed strike groups to break through the city of Pokrovsk. At the same time, the Russian forces are attacking the Mayak, Vladimirovka, and Rusinyar on the eastern flank of the direction, but they have not yet managed to secure themselves in these settlements, according to Mashevitz. The Ukrainian defense forces successfully counterattacked in the area of Mayak. Also, Russian armed forces managed to reach the city of Rodinskaya on the road to Pokrovsk-Dobropolye, but it will not be secure in it. According to Mashevitz, the Russian command aims to cut the road to Pokrovsk Pokrovsk-Dobropolye at any cost and to take the neighboring logistical route through Grishina under fire control. And in battles for Rodinskaya, the fate of the entire agglomeration of Pokrovsk and Myrnograd is being solved. To the south and southwest of Pokrovsk, as Mashevitz writes, the Russian armed forces cannot firmly secure themselves in Zverev and Kotlin, and the Ukrainian military managed to clean most of the Yuchneia during the counterattack. To the south of the Ukrainian defense forces, the enemy was dropped from the border of Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, a counterattack between Kotlyrovka and Orhov, freeing 4 square kilometers. Deep State notes the Russian advance in the South Donetsk direction and in the area of Novopol. Konstantin Mashevitz believes that Russian troops are trying to reach the junction of the Donetsk, Zaporozhsk, and Dnipropetrovsk regions, on the area from Ivanivka to Nikolaevka, for which they are attacking Ivanovka and Iskru, as well as being able to advance to the northeast from Alexandrorod, compliciting the defense of the settlement to take Voskresenka and advance 1 kilometer from it towards Sichnevo and Malivka in the Dnipropetrovsk region. The attacks in the direction of Kamishevek and Timirovka have also not been successful by the Russian military, Mashevitz says. In general, according to him, the pace of the territorial advance of Russian armed forces in this direction is decreasing. Now they are 5-6 square kilometers per day, when they recently reached 8-9 square kilometers per day. In addition, in Deep State they noted the advance of Russian armed forces to the east of Belogorovka to Grigorovka along the bank of the Siversk Donetsk. Here the Russian armed forces are trying to advance to the north of the Siversk, but for now, this does not work out very well. In addition, the advance of the Russians, according to Deep State, had a place in the area of Grigorovka, another one to the north of Chasiv Yar. These actions in combination are subordinated to the general plan of the offensive from the east on the Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, to which the Russians do not leave any hope to go, but for now they are no longer close to this task than, for example, a year ago. Channel Lokagar in turn summarizes the statistics of the intensity of Russian assault actions according to the General Staff of Ukrainian Armed Forces. In the last week, from July 28 to August 3, the number of attacks decreased by 3% compared to the previous week, becoming less than 150 per day. 40% of all attacks come to the Pokrovsk direction, where the intensity of assaults, on the contrary, has increased by 14%. Also, the channel notes the intensification of Russian attacks on the Dnipropetrovsk Isles on the Kherson direction, where the number of attacks has almost doubled, achieving 48 in a week. What the Russian assaults look like you have been knowing for a long time, and that they are often punishments for Russian soldiers who are not pleased with the commanders too. And another pre-death appeal of one of such soldiers appeared. Beep Kanovalov said that the case of Puzik is alive, and now he is going to his last assault. Greetings, I'm Kanovalov Beep Valerievich, nicknamed Horse, and it seems my path has come to an end. Without Ernest Yagodvin, almost a year has passed. We've been fighting for long in the filthiest ranks, drug trafficking, pities, rotting grandfathers, loans to thousands of lives of real men, patriots of Russia, the great Russia. The case of Puzik is worse than ever. Now it's our turn, Kisov, for the last assault. Who's behind it, you already know, by the thoughts of turning the weapons against the commanders who, according to them, are doing more than getting hit apparently do not arise. It's fascinating talk, honestly. However, it was written a long time ago by Turgenev in Mumu. He did not expect to see so many illustrations of classic literature in his age. When he was young, for example, was perceived as some kind of grotesque. But no, really, life apparently looks like this. I don't know, when you read Mumu, you thought about what the hell you were doing in Kazan and drown your only friend. Moreover, so that then you can just go to the sunset. How is this possible? But no, here please we see that the commanders, who, in the opinion of the soldiers themselves, are criminals, who, what is called, have given their homeland, given order. You record this order, you know, you consider it criminal, you consider them criminals, but you still go and die. This is fantastic. But yes, it happens in life, and we now see a bright confirmation of this. In the Gore, they showed another portion of the frames of the strike of objects in occupied Crimea with the help of long-range FPV drones with Starlink. In Ukrainian intelligence, they described the new stage of the operation in this way. Enemy RLS in the domes, airborne motorized missile base on Apetra, another hunt for scouts in Crimea. The demilitarization of temporarily occupied Crimea continues, moving away from capture missiles, combat drones, special units, the Gore of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, Primara, ghosts. They carried out a successful fire strike on the enemy airborne motorized missile project 2510 BK-16, as well as burned Russian RLS Nebo from the SVO, RLS Podolka 1, and RLS 96 L6E. After serious losses of air defense objects on the peninsula, carried out in particular by Ghosts and Gore, Russian occupiers in Crimea began to hide their valuable military objects in dome structures. Another of such domes was hit by the Apatra Special NASA Military Intelligence, where the Russians placed the PVO base of the 3rd Radio-Technical Regiment. Military Unit 856-83A. The armed struggle continues, the words of Ukraine, they emphasize. In the Russian army, new unmanned technologies are also being taken to arms, but there is a nuance. In the arms of Russian drone operators, heavy drones are increasingly noticed by bombers, who, by the Ukrainian Defense Forces, are called vampires, and in the Russian armed forces, females. This is what the Ukrainian military author of the Telegram channel officer is talking about. For the past 6 to 8 months, Russian armed forces have actively started using heavy its hours bombers in quotation marks for production, but as to how much they are really its hours, a big question. On Russian sites many times, directions were published on the Russian website for the use of vampires in Russian, and the ground control stations are almost identical to those that the vampires have. From this, it can be concluded that the enemy could adapt and use trophy equipment for their purposes, and this is not very good. At the moment, we are mostly retreating, and accordingly, all lost equipment, for example, from the Russian armed forces, sooner or later, are on the territory under the control of the Russians, where they loiter and make up their own. In principle, nothing surprising. It is no longer clear why they did not think this through before, because heavy bombers take their soul from the end of the 22nd year, and the morale may be just that. It is necessary to improve the protection and not to allow the opportunity to use the board after it's lost to the operators. Although I'm sure that they did it not only due to the trophies from the combat zone, but also to steal the heavy bombers. As far as I remember, Russian drone operators have once again complained that Babkyoshka have drones on the Russian market. So only they Russian fighters are not by pocket, in contrast to Ukrainian ones, which get these and other drones from the state on the means allocated to the units and through the system of Yipolov. Therefore, they have to adjust the trophies, often collecting from 2 to 3 damaged drones from the working person. This is another example of cyberpunk. Well, another illustration of the situation with Russian logistics under the attacks of Ukrainian drones was found by the collector Zenidia Ivan Filippov, this time on the channel Prizrek Novo Russia. Here's what is written there. But from point A to point B movement is not an adventure for the weak-willed. 1 from 0 to 3 kilometers from there. Combat zone line is almost an unbreakable. The own deliveries are mostly with UAV. Drops are in very bad weather. Move by crawl or by short drops from shelter to shelter by 1 or 2 people. 310 kilometers is a zone of increased risk. Motorcycles are already being actively used here for delivery and movement. They are also actively dying here. Transports are landing in large numbers, knives, buckins, Ural, and so on, but they are very often left there. 10-30 kilometers are the zone of risk. It is already moving on all types of car transport. The chance to be hit is quite high, but not so much to refuse the use of cars. Fourth, over 30 kilometers. The main danger comes from difficult and expensive weapons, for example, HIMARS. Will be used for important purposes. If you follow elementary rules, masked, distracted by the periodically changing place of the location, you can avoid strikes. The range is given conditionally. On different parts of the front, it can be hidden, dependent on the enemy's capabilities and ours. I will add for myself that first of all, these indicators are constantly changing, since Ukraine is trying to expand its own kill zone and knock out Russian logistics more and more deeply. And secondly, unfortunately, this situation is observed from the Ukrainian side, at least in those directions where the units of the Russian center, Rubicon, work. It remains to be hoped that Ukraine will manage to build a kill zone more effectively due to the organization and technological benefits. Hope for preserve and expand of which is now dependent on the commander of the unmanned systems forces, Madyar, who is familiar with this kitchen from the inside. Buryatia volunteers began collecting refrigerators and motorcycles for the war in Ukraine. In the network groups of the village of Zagrevo, in Buryatia, an announcement appeared of volunteers in the movement of Angel Wings, which reported about the collecting of refrigerators for the need of field hospitals. In the same way, motorcycles began to be collected, writes the local newspaper V. Zagrevo. Let him bring the used SVO better than he will stand at home, said the resident of Ilika about his refrigerator. The Krasnopiev family from the same village lost a husband and a father in the war in Ukraine. Olga Krasnopieva and her son Roman buried a man named Ishupiter in the garage of the motorcycle. Now they have transferred equipment to the front in the memory of their husband and father. They saw an ad about collecting motorcycles from volunteers. They asked whether such a motorcycle was needed on the front. They told us that it would serve our guys and we did not think about it, so we gave it to the volunteers, said Olga Krasnopieva. There are still people who have been given refrigerators from Zagrevo and a motorcycle from Ilka. Russia is holding on to such people, said volunteer Vyacheslav Sharygin. Why are there no refrigerators left in military hospitals and motorcycles and brigades? This is a big question because you see well, I said it many times, I will emphasize it again just in case because it seems to me that sometimes this question arises. Why the absence of something in Ukraine is normal and the absence of something in Russia is not normal, not because of double standards, but because everything is very simple. Russia is leading this war. Russia began it, Russia continues it. It was preparing for this war. It makes a decision every day about the continuation of this war, and it makes people kill Ukrainians. There is no choice for Ukrainians. Well, that is, if Ukrainians stop fighting, Ukraine will be destroyed. If Russia stops fighting, there will be no war. In this sense, Ukraine, whether it is due to the presence of resources or not, depends on how much Russia surpasses it territorial, economically, by indicators, by production, military. Industry, by the presence of planes, by the presence of missiles, and so on. Ukraine is still forced to fight. Therefore, the shortage of certain means there is logical because the country is much less, the economy is much less. And the country is not preparing for war, well, that is, and does not want to fight, well, that is, it has to do this. Russia, on the other hand, takes the decision every day to continue this war, is preparing for this war, put a defense on military rails, and so on. But it cannot provide a hospital with freezers and brigades motorcycles, which send to pointless meat assaults. So yes, these are two completely different situations. Therefore, we help Ukraine with us, and we help Russia get rid of all its equipment from handrails and all the rest. But another reminder that the wounded and dead Russian soldiers are considered to be worked out for the state. In Cherepovets in the Volgograd region, a serviceman was buried without any military honors. After many wounds, he came to the treatment center. He died at home, not in the hospital, not on the battlefield, but in the dacha. And therefore, they decided that this hero should not be buried on the Alley of Fame, but on the general map. Yuri told the public figure of the participant of the SVO about the story of Nekrasov Eduard, who received many wounds during service, carried out several operations. The soldier came to the vacation to pass treatment, but for unknown reasons died on August 24, 2025, I hope with a break. Yuri expressed discontent that despite the part in the SVO and the wounds received, Eduard was buried in the general place on the cemetery, not on the Alley of Slava as it is supposed to be for soldiers. At the same time, the funerary passed without any military honors, believing him by law. Well, let him say thank you for not buried in garbage, not in a bunch of beep and everything else as usually buried by Russian soldiers because the cemetery is occupied, which I told you about. So he should be proud that he was found instead of on the grave and not in the dumpster. Well, again, the Russian military threat not only to itself, not only to Ukrainians, but also to the Russians when they return from the front on vacation or by injury. In Chelyabinsk, a participant of the SVO is detained by a suspect in the kill of his wife. 37-year-old Sergei Moskowenko was found in a house in the factory tractor in the area of the city. He was hiding in several houses from the place of the kill. They were able to identify the man thanks to the recordings from the demophone camera. The kill itself occurred recently on August 5. Yesterday, the Churalov district where the crime occurred, DPS posts were put up and the police were redirected to find the man. Another example of how a Russian soldier kills people on a civilian, in this case his wife. Take care of them, do not be next to them, do not be in one room, do not have any relations with Russian soldiers. You see, people, when they return with any war, they are deeply disabled people. It does not matter on which country they were, so, of course, even Ukrainians returning from the war to the civilian, there are also a whole bunch of psychological problems with which you need the appropriate social composition and so on, because the war is a specific place from small to large who returns healthy, psychically, including. But the problem with Russian soldiers is in several more things. The first is that this is a fascist occupation army. Literally, this is not a path, this is not a metaphor. This is the army that capture other people's country and kill people there. Fascist occupation army. Therefore, the orders that come to them break their psyche even more. They shoot peaceful citizens, they strike residential buildings, and so on. And this is turned into a system. They know this, they see this, moreover, their own. How is it? Military service is connected with a large number of injured factors, including meat assaults and so on and so forth. The attitude of the command of blocking in the pit, striking in these pedos. Therefore, it breaks the psyche completely. Therefore, the Russian soldiers returning from the war are a mix of everything bad that exists in the Russian armed forces and everything bad that exists in all other traumas. These people are really dangerous. Dangerous for yourself, dangerous for the environment, and multiply this by the presence of a massive number of weapons on the black market that come from the war. And you get a nuclear prison. So you do not need to communicate with them, you do not need to be friends with them, you do not need to be in a wedding, you do not need to let children go to them. These are dangerous people who are not going to do anything in Russia, no social support programs, real working people, and moreover, on the contrary, the rhetoric of hatred is constantly poured from the TV, the rhetoric of terrorization, the rhetoric of repression, and all that kind of thing. So yes, this is the most real danger for ordinary civilians in Russia itself, too. So watch out for such people, well, and military objects. Everything is classic here because it will come at them, it has already come, it will come, and will come in the future. And Michael Nacke was with you, and see you soon. All the best, bye.